Paul Hogan thought he was making a nice little comedy for Australia. That's it. No plan to take over the world. Just a chill outback story about a guy with a knife and a funny hat. And then it made more money than Aliens. Almost knocked Top Gun off the top of the box office, and yet behind the scenes it was a mess. Here are 15 weird facts about Crocodile Dundee that'll make you wonder how the hell this movie ever made it to theaters. Paul Hogan made millions off this movie. He also made a lifelong enemy, the Australian Taxation Office. For years, they went after him for what they said were unpaid taxes tied to the film's earnings. This wasn't a one-time audit. It turned into a full-blown national soap opera. Hogan claimed it was a witch hunt. The tax office kept dragging him into court. At one point, he joked they should build him a statue instead. The government disagreed. The case lasted over a decade. It finally ended when Hogan walked away without paying a cent and immediately called it a scam. The basic idea for Crocodile Dundee came from a guy named Rod Ansel. Total survival nut. Lived off the land after his boat capsized in the Northern Territory. Newspapers loved him, called him the real-life Crocodile Dundee. Hogan took the idea and ran with it. Ansel's actual life got dark, though. He got deeper into bush living, started stockpiling weapons, got hooked on drugs. In 1999, he shot a cop and got killed in a standoff. Completely spun out. Nothing like the cheeky movie character. Hogan never talked much about it after that. When the film started screening internationally, a weird rumor started to spread. In certain countries, especially places where English wasn't widely spoken, some audiences genuinely thought Paul Hogan was Clint Eastwood. It sounds ridiculous now, but back then, a lot of people only saw the movie on bootleg tapes or bad VHS dubs. There were even pirated posters with stenciled Eastwood-style art. Hogan thought the whole thing was funny. He said if Clint wanted the credit, he'd happily hand over all the press junkets, but he was keeping the hat. After the US release, Hogan started flying back and forth between Los Angeles and Sydney. On paper, he was a millionaire. But instead of wiring money or setting up international accounts, he started carrying it himself. Literally, thousands of dollars in envelopes, sometimes rolled up in socks stuffed into his luggage. He didn't trust banks, didn't trust lawyers, didn't trust Hollywood finance people. He wanted to keep his hands on what he'd earned. When people asked about it later, he didn't make it sound dramatic. He just said that's how it worked back then. The knife scene. You know the one. It became a pop culture grenade. Suddenly, everyone wanted a massive Bowie knife, and not just collectors. Teenagers, drunk guys in bars, people who should absolutely not own large blades. In some US states, knockoff Dundee knives were being sold under the table. The boom got so ridiculous that local governments started cracking down on blade sales. And here's the part no one talks about. Some of the money that funded the film came out of a government program meant for Aboriginal education. Not joking, the production qualified for Australia's 10BA tax shelter, which gave huge deductions for cultural projects. One investor funneled in money that had originally been earmarked for Indigenous initiatives. It got buried. Quietly, no headlines, no formal backlash. But a chunk of Crocodile Dundee's budget came from a pool of money that was supposed to help Aboriginal communities, and instead, it went to Paul Hogan's knife. That waterfall scene everyone remembers? Linda Kozlowski hated filming it. She was cold the entire time, the crew kept adjusting the camera angles, and she had skin-colored tape holding things in place so the footage wouldn't get flagged. There were dozens of people just standing around while she walked through the water pretending it was romantic. Later on, she said she felt humiliated and didn't understand why that shot became the thing people associated with her. To her, it wasn't sexy. It was just one more scene she had to get through while freezing and uncomfortable. For some reason, Crocodile Dundee got nominated for Best Original Screenplay at the Oscars. That same year, Platoon, Salvador, and Hannah and Her Sisters were in the mix. So you've got Oliver Stone's Vietnam drama, a political thriller, a Woody Allen film, and then Paul Hogan with a fish-out-of-water knife comedy. It made absolutely no sense. The script was up against war crimes, trauma, political cynicism, and then this guy wandering around New York City holding a Bowie knife. He didn't win, obviously, but for a while he was technically Oscar-nominated screenwriter Paul Hogan, and that title stuck around way longer than it should have. In 1986, Crocodile Dundee made $174 million at the U.S. box office. That's just $2 million short of Top Gun. It was the second biggest movie in the country that year, beating Aliens, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Platoon, all of it. You could go down the list of great movies released that year, and Hogan's little Australian comedy crushed most of them. The only thing that beat it was Tom Cruise in Aviators, and even that wasn't by much. If it had made just a couple million more, Crocodile Dundee would have been the #1 movie in America in 1986, and it wasn't even trying. Hogan and Kozlowski got together after the film, and for a while they really leaned into the whole movie romance dynamic. They ended up married, living in Los Angeles, doing the sequels, the interviews, the press tours, until it all fell apart. Years later, Kozlowski said she gave up everything to be with him, and she meant that literally. Her acting career, her independence, the life she'd had before the film, she left all of it behind. And when the relationship broke down, there wasn't much left for her to return to. Hogan called it amicable, but her version of the story didn't sound quite so tidy. After the movie took off, Hogan was suddenly being offered everything. Studios wanted him to star in cop movies, action thrillers, monster flicks. He said no to all of it. He told interviewers he didn't want to play some dumb cop or be eaten by a giant animal. He liked golf, he liked fishing, and he liked being in Australia. He didn't see the point in chasing Hollywood money if it meant giving up his life. At the time, it sounded like stubbornness. Now it just sounds like someone who didn't want to end up trapped in a dozen terrible studio comedies where he played a washed-up version of himself, which, ironically, still kind of happened anyway. When Paramount picked up the movie for U.S. release, executives got nervous about Hogan's voice. Not the jokes, not the slang, the actual sound of his accent. They thought Americans wouldn't be able to understand him. So, for a while, they seriously considered dubbing over all of his lines with a neutral voice actor. Not tweaking the dialogue, but fully replacing him. There were test tracks made and meetings about how to roll it out. Hogan found out and pushed back hard. He argued that his voice was half the character. The compromise ended up being 2 versions of the movie, one for Australia and one for international release. But the full dub plan nearly happened. And if Hogan hadn't intervened, someone else would have been saying, "That's not a knife." When Hogan first pitched the movie, it wasn't a romantic comedy. The original idea was closer to a spoof. He described it as, an Aussie bushman comes to New York and out-Rambos Rambo. That was the joke. It was meant to poke fun at American action movies. Somewhere along the way, the script changed. They kept some of the satire, but added a romance arc, softened the edges, and turned it into something more mainstream. The knife scene stayed in, the fish out of water setup stayed in, but the tone shifted. You can still feel traces of the original parody, but by the time it hit theaters, it was a much friendlier version of what they started with. The crocodiles weren't the problem during filming. The crocodile handlers were. They went through multiple wranglers during production. Some quit, some got fired. One guy was drunk on set and wandered off into the bush mid-shoot. Another tried to use real crocs in scenes without telling the safety team. It became such a disaster that the crew finally gave up and used a mix of trained animals, fake crocs, and animatronics. Hogan later said the crocodiles were never the dangerous part. It was the bloody blokes wrangling them. And coming from a guy who spent months standing near the water in crocodile country, that's saying something. Crocodile Dundee was partially funded by a pyramid scheme. One of the early investors in the film was tangled up in a notorious tax scam in Australia called the bottom of the harbor schemes. These were basically financial hit jobs. People would strip companies of their assets and records, vanish them on paper, and dodge millions in taxes. Total fraud. Turns out, some of that dirty money got funneled straight into the production of Crocodile Dundee. It took years for the whole paper trail to come to light. Paul Hogan wasn't directly involved, but it definitely didn't help his ongoing battles with the Australian Taxation Office, and those fights dragged on forever.